welcome to the Perception Podcast. My name is Olomide Moses. Today we are going to be talking about the beginning of an infinity of knowledge. If you're very conversant or if you're a listener of the Nava podcast with Nava Ravikin, when they were talking about Deutsch's philosophy on the beginning of an infinity of knowledge, I listened to that podcast and this is what Nava Ravikin deducted from what it was talking about. Now, Deutsch's philosophy of the beginning of an infinity of knowledge. 1. Reality is comprehensible. I don't have a problem with that, but to some certain extent, I do not agree with that. And also, good science explanation. A good explanation that is science-backed creates a progress of knowledge. I do agree with that to a certain level also. And also, human beings are problem solvers and we can all solve problems. And he also said anything that can be known and understood can be known and understood. And human beings are problem solvers. And also another thing Naval African was also talking about was that we are the center of the universe. It is of us to explore and exploit. And also, with good scientific explanations, there can be an infinity of progress. That's why we are the beginning of an infinity of knowledge, according to Naval Ravikant. And also, with good scientific explanations, we can also replace theories that has been existing with better theories. I quite agree with all that also. But now, let me start taking the issues one after the other. The first one, reality is comprehensible. To a certain extent, I agree reality is comprehensible. But how comprehensive and how realistic is the comprehension of the understanding of reality? At times, we need to get to the depth of consciousness and awareness to become realistic, to understand it. For you to understand reality, you must go beyond what you think it is. As Thich Nhat Hanh said, non-self and impermanence are the key to reality of life. And only when we get to that point of infinity of knowledge, that's when we can get to understand the reality of life, of the cosmos, of nature, of fortune, and of God. Secondly, I want to take the other point of Deutsch's philosophy. That is, we are the center and of the universe, and it is of us to explore and exploit. Now, I don't really agree with that. Alan Watts made a very good explanation in relation to this issue. Alan Watts said, we are not independent of the cosmos, of nature, of fortune, of God, and of the earth. Rather, we are part of it. That's why our footprint, when it's left, nature feels it. We are not independent of the earth. We are not independent of nature. We are part of nature. The independence and consciousness of man is a wrong analogy, is a wrong misconception, and it's not the truth. This is what many people don't understand. This is what Alan Watts referred to as the Gege-Moge, the interdependence and penetration of the cosmos. This is what many people don't understand. Let me give a vivid and a clear explanation. If you look at, for instance, if you're running up a hill, do you think you're the only one doing it? As you're running up the hill is making you to run it up. And that is why you're able to run up the hill. There's what they call the interdependence and the penetration of the cosmos, which Alan Watts referred to as the Gege-Moge. There's always a connection we are having that we are not conscious or aware of, and we do not take note of. And that's why we're having these problems. This is the reality of what I'm talking about. And that's what the Deutsch's philosophy did not consider. There is something connecting us with nature. If there's no life in our hands, if there's no life in our legs, how can we even walk and use our hands and our legs? Now, if the cloud doesn't turn into rain and it doesn't nurtures the trees and plants, and the sun doesn't shine and give us energy, how can we bear fruit? How can we bear flowers? That was what Thich Nhat Hanh said in his book, The Way We See Things. These are the realities of life. This is the truth. We are part of nature. We are not independent from nature. As I've said in my previous podcast, where you're a theme, a plot, a scene, a position. That's what you are. And nature has a way of making you fulfill its purpose. And that's why you're a part of it. You're not independent of it. You're a part of it. You're not independent of it. That's why Alan Watts referred to as what they call the Gege. The likes of Deutsch, when you ask them, is it the man in the boat that is sailing the boat, or is it being sailed by the wind or the sea? People like Deutsch is based on his philosophy because it's a deeply rational and an optimistic philosophy of life. As Navar African said, is deeply rational and optimistic. And that's why he's saying what he's saying. Now, is it a man in the boat that is sailing the boat? Or is it a wind or the sea that is sailing the boat? People like Deutsch is based on his philosophy will tell you it's the man in the boat. Rather, it's the mind. Everything begins and starts in the mind. That's why I used Kant as an analogy. Kant made us understand if you become curious and you become part of nature, you will discover knowledge, science, technology, and invention because you're curious and you're part of nature. The moment you become curious and part of nature, and nature looks at you and said, you are part of me, rather you're not independent of me. Now, let me give you the trick of what makes you part of me, and now we can coexist together. It will now create what I call curiosity, down to science, science down to knowledge, knowledge down to invention, invention down to technology, technology down to reality, reality down to the earth. This is what Kant referred to during his time. And this is the reality of nature. We are part of it, we are not independent of it. I repeat, we are part of nature and we are not independent of it. Deutsch's whole philosophy could be summed up in one thing. Man is independent of the earth. The earth is of his to explore and exploit. This is a wrong philosophy, wrong analogy, and wrong misconception based on my own analysis. Because we are part of nature. We are not independent of nature. Now, if you're independent of nature, you cannot be a part of something and become independent of it. That is not reality. That is not truth. Deutsch's philosophy of the beginning of knowledge or the beginning of an infinity of knowledge, I do not agree with that analysis. That's why Ravikant was trying to say, do not misconcept me, do not misconcept me. I'm not misconcepting a Ravikant analogy. I have my own analogy. I don't agree with all the philosophy of Deutsch because it's all centered as man being independent of nature. Man is not independent of nature. As Alan Watts said, if you run up a hill, the hill is running you up. There are a series of events that lead to a particular event. And this is what we call the interdependence and the penetration of cosmos, which Alan Watts referred to as the Gege. And this is the reality of life. And these are the things we must get to know. So, in conclusion of Deutsch's philosophy of the beginning of an infinity of knowledge, I do agree with good scientific explanations. Progress can be made. Human can solve problems, but not all problems can be solved by humans. Anything that can be known and understood can be known and understood. I agree to a certain extent, but it depends on the consciousness and awareness of what Deutsch is trying to talk about. So those points I agree with, and I believe wealth is something that could be transferred. I agree with Navar Ravikant. So from a science-based explanation of Deutsch's philosophy of an infinity of knowledge, I do agree with some certain things and I do not agree with some certain things. What have I been talking about? I've been talking about the beginning of an infinity of knowledge based on Deutsch's philosophy and listen on the Navar Ravikant podcast. As Navar Ravikant said, what is at the core of that philosophy? So that's what I've been talking about. And these are my own analysis. I hope you've learned one or two things from my podcast. I'm just trying to have a different view or a different analysis of Deutsch's philosophy. And don't forget, this is deeply rationally optimistic according to Ravikant, which is deeply optional, which I agree. is deeply optional optimism. It's deeply rational optimism. But in reality, there are some part of it I do not agree with. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. Have a lovely day. Thank you very much. Remain blessed.